Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever wondered how a country's commitment to human rights is actually measured? Or how those domestic efforts connect to a much larger global picture? It's a huge question, really,
Yeah.
and often reveals surprising complexities, even under the most sterling reputations. Today, we're taking a deep dive into Denmark's human rights record and its pivotal role in the Global Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. It's a fascinating look at how a nation's internal policies, its challenges, its successes, how they inevitably ripple out into international
Yeah,
efforts.
absolutely. And to guide us through this, we've pulled together a pretty powerful stack of sources. We're looking at an in-depth report from the UN Committee Against Torture, which gives a critical review of Denmark's actions. We also have a comprehensive document from the Danish Institute for Human Rights. It's called Human Rights and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
Mhm.
And, crucially, Denmark's own strategic roadmap, the World We Share development strategy. Lots to get into.
Right, quite the reading list.
Yeah. So our mission here is to sift through these, to extract not just the facts, but the really important nuggets of insight, the things that connect the dots between what happens at home, domestic policy, and these big international goals. Ultimately, we want to help you understand why these intricate legal and political frameworks are so important, why they matter to your world, maybe more directly than you might think.
Exactly. And what you'll gain from this deep dive is, well, hopefully a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on a critical topic. You'll get some surprising facts, maybe some real aha moments, and practical insights that cut through the jargon. So yeah, let's unpack this. Okay, so Denmark, often seen as a global leader in human rights, right? Consistently ranking high on various international indices. But what happens when international experts, like the UN Committee Against Torture, take a really deep look at their domestic practices? What do they actually find?
That's a great starting point. And it's important to say the Committee Against Torture doesn't just jump on the negatives. They actually start by acknowledging Denmark's um, positive global efforts, things that are really commendable.
Okay, like what specifically?
Well, they welcome Denmark's active role in combating torture internationally, promoting the Convention Against Torture, and ratifying other key international instruments, like the one protecting people from enforced disappearance. Plus, on the legislative front, Denmark has made some pretty significant strides.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, introducing a new definition of rape back in 2021 that criminalizes non-consensual acts. That was a big step. And increasing the minimum marriage age to 18 in 2017. They've even set up an expert committee specifically to look at criminalizing torture as a distinct crime in their own laws.
So they're active on the world stage, updating laws.
Exactly. It really sets the stage, showing a nation committed to these principles globally.
Those are definitely significant reforms, painting that picture of strong global engagement. But even with these positive steps, when the focus shifts inward to domestic practices, what were some of the more maybe surprising or unexpected challenges the committee found inside Denmark itself?
Right, and that's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, quite insightful. One significant area of concern is the use of coercive measures in psychiatric institutions.
Coercive measures like physical restraints.
Yes, exactly, including things like restraining belts. The committee highlighted a worrying increase in these measures since 2015. But here's the really stark point. This increase has also impacted children.
Children. Wow.
Yeah, a rise in child coercion since 2011. And adding to that, concern about a lack of clear ways for those children to actually submit complaints.
That's tough to hear. It challenges that image of a progressive, child-centered system.
It absolutely does. It highlights a real human rights issue and a significant area needing reform. Now, Denmark has responded. They've got a 10-year action plan for psychiatric care, and they're negotiating, exploring less intrusive options. The goal is to reduce these measures by 2030.
Okay, so there's a plan in motion, but clearly a serious concern flag there. That's a powerful insight into mental health care, often overlooked. Shifting gears a bit now, another critical area the committee mentioned was pretrial detention. What's the story there?
Indeed. And here's another striking point that often, flies under the radar. Almost 40%, 0% of the prison population in Denmark consists of individuals in pretrial detention.
40%. That seems incredibly high. These are people not yet convicted.
Exactly. Not convicted. And in 2022, the average time spent in pretrial detention was 5 months.
5 months. Wow.
Yeah. And while courts are supposed to reassess these detentions regularly, that high percentage, well, it suggests immense pressure on their judicial system. Combine that with reported poor conditions, overcrowding, lack of staff. It raises questions about efficiency and the presumption of innocence.
So what are they doing about it?
Well, Denmark is assessing alternatives, constructing new facilities, trying to improve staff conditions, and then there's that rather unusual agreement to rent prison cells in Kosovo.
Renting cells in another country.
Yeah. But with the very strict condition that those facilities must meet Danish standards and international obligations, still, it's a notable move.
It certainly is. That 40% figure is staggering.
Ah.
Okay, so beyond just the number of people in pretrial detention, did the committee look at the broader picture, like safety within the correctional system overall and accountability for police conduct? Those seem crucial.
Absolutely crucial. And yes, they did. They noted a concerning trend, a notable increase in violent incidents and threats among inmates that immediately flags safety issues inside prisons.
Right.
Then, on police conduct, take pepper spray use. There were 579 instances reported by police in 2021. 11 of those required emergency treatment.
Okay.
What's critical here isn't just the number, but the question of necessity and proportionality. Is it being used appropriately, especially since its use has also increased in prisons?
And what about oversight? Is there a body looking into complaints?
There is. The Independent Police Complaints Authority, or IPCA. It is independent. And get this, from 2014 to 2019, they reviewed 28 cases involving deaths in custody. 6 of those were in police detention.
Okay, and the outcome?
Not a single one led to criminal charges against officers.
None out of 28 deaths.
None. That's a stark finding, isn't it?
Yeah.
It raises pretty serious questions about accountability and effective oversight. There's also the Parliamentary Ombudsman, who acts as a national preventive mechanism, providing independent scrutiny. That's positive. And they plan to expand its reach to Greenland.
That brings us to Greenland and the Faroe Islands. You mentioned Greenland. Given their status as self-governing countries within the Kingdom of Denmark, how do these issues play out there? Are they the same, or are there unique challenges?
They definitely have unique challenges, but also their own efforts. In Greenland, for instance, a lack of dedicated facilities has meant juveniles sometimes being held with adults.
That sounds problematic.
Very. And children from social care homes being placed with kids who've committed crimes. That's a serious concern from a human rights perspective. But Greenland is also clearly committed to human rights. They have their own Council for Human Rights, and there's a proposed law on equality and non-discrimination in the works.
And the Faroe Islands.
The Faroe Islands also faces issues, like using remand custody in their small detention center, but they have their own local ombudsman and recently amended their rules on coercion in psychiatry, just last year in 2023. So the key insight, really, is that while the Kingdom of Denmark provides the overarching framework, these self-governing regions have their own specific human rights landscapes. They need tailored solutions and oversight.
Okay, that makes sense. So these domestic challenges, from psychiatric care to prisons, police conduct, the situation in Greenland and the Faroes, they reveal the sort of everyday realities of human rights protection. But how does all this internal stuff weave into Denmark's bigger global picture, especially with these sustainable development goals, the SDGs? I guess that's where the World We Share strategy comes in, trying to connect those two worlds.
Exactly. That strategy, the world we share, it lays out a very clear, very ambitious vision. It talks about a secure, sustainable, poverty-free world guided by the UN SDGs and the Paris Agreement on climate change.
And human rights are central to that vision.
Absolutely fundamental. The strategy is explicitly built on democratic values and human rights. They call it a human-centered approach. And that cross-cutting principle, no one must be left behind, it isn't just a catchy phrase. It's a real commitment, with a specific focus on women and girls and other marginalized groups. Think indigenous peoples, LGBTI persons, persons with disabilities, those affected by HIV/AIDS.
So it's not just about foreign aid money, it's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It's rooted in the idea that human rights are the very foundation for sustainable development. You can't really have one without the other.
Okay, that makes sense conceptually, but it raises that big question. How tightly are human rights and sustainable development really interwoven? Are they sort of two separate tracks running in parallel, or are they genuinely like part of the same road?
That's a fantastic question. And what's truly fascinating here, according to that Danish Institute report, Human Rights in the 2030 Agenda, is that more than 90% of the 169 SDG targets actually reflect core international human rights and labor standards.
Wow, over 90%. That's huge.
It really is. It's not just a slight overlap. It's profound mutual reinforcement. The 2030 Agenda itself is explicitly grounded in human rights. It references the Universal Declaration, international treaties. Think of it this way. The SDGs aren't just about economics or the environment. They are, in many ways, a practical blueprint for achieving human rights globally.
Mm-hmm.
And SDG 16 in particular, the one focused on peace, justice, and strong institutions, that's identified as having really significant transformative potential for human rights because it tackles so many core civil and political rights.
Okay, so they're deeply interwoven in theory and in the goals themselves. But how does a country like Denmark actually do this integration? It sounds like it could be a lot of, bureaucratic box ticking. How do they make that connection practical and meaningful on the ground? How do they integrate efforts and data?
Right, good question. And this is where we get some really practical insights from the reports. One of the most effective strategies they talk about is basically recycling human rights reporting for the SDGs.
Recycling reporting, what does that mean?
It means taking all the information already gathered for existing human rights reviews, like the Universal Periodic Review, the UPR, where every UN member gets reviewed.
Right, I've heard of the UPR.
Yeah, or reports for the treaty bodies, those expert committees monitoring specific conventions like women's rights or children's rights, and strategically using that wealth of information to inform the voluntary national reviews, the VNRs, which countries submit on their SDG progress.
Ah, so using the work they're already doing for human rights to also report on the SDGs. Smart.
Exactly. It's about leveraging existing work. It makes things more efficient, more coherent, and boosts accountability. They give examples like Costa Rica integrating reports on women's rights from the CDAG committee into its VNR on gender equality, which is SDG 5, or Belgium using recommendations from the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child to develop its own national indicators for children's rights, supporting SDG 16.2.
Got it. So that's about leveraging existing reports. What else?
Well, the report also highlights a crucial framework called a human rights-based approach to data, or HRBAD for short.
HRBAD. Okay, what's that about?
Think of it as ensuring that the very process of collecting data respects and upholds human rights. It's not just what data you collect, but how.
How so?
It has several components, like making sure people can self-identify rather than being put in boxes, ensuring participation, people having a say in what data is gathered about them. Crucially, disaggregation, breaking down data by group, like gender, age, disability, ethnicity, so no one gets left invisible in the averages.
Ah, so you can see if specific groups are being left behind.
Precisely. And then transparency, accountability, and respecting privacy throughout the whole process. It's about data collection that actively champions human dignity. It makes that no one left behind principle truly actionable, not just a slogan.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that national human rights institutions and HRIs, like the Danish Institute we mentioned, they play a vital role here too. They act as national accountability mechanisms.
Mm.
In fact, the very existence of an effective NHRI is an indicator for SDG 16.81. Yeah, and the ideal scenario involves creating what they call a pluralistic ecosystem of data. That means combining official government statistics with qualitative data and insights from NHRIs, from civil society groups, even citizen-generated data, to get a much richer, more nuanced picture of what's really going on.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive here, it seems really clear that the path to a truly just and sustainable world isn't paved with separate roads for human rights and development. It's much more intricate, deeply integrated, where domestic challenges, like the ones we discussed in Denmark, have real global implications and vice versa. It's all connected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If we connect this all back to the bigger picture, it means that, say, efforts to protect human rights in a psychiatric institution in Denmark, or to ensure fair trials for those 40% in pre-trial detention. These aren't just isolated acts happening in one country. They are threads in a much larger global tapestry, one that also includes climate action, economic growth, fighting poverty. These aren't separate issues, they're fundamentally linked. Because the dignity of the human person, well, that's foundational to all progress, isn't it?
Yeah.
That no one must be left behind principle from the 2030 Agenda, which is so deeply rooted in human rights values, it really drives this interconnectedness. It reminds us that every local effort contributes to that bigger global vision.
So thinking about that connection, what's maybe a provocative thought for you, our listener, to mull over after this? If the 2030 Agenda aims to leave no one behind, and human rights are its very foundation, what innovative local solutions might you uncover by looking at human rights data, maybe in your own community, through the lens of a sustainable development goal? Perhaps it's about advocating for better data, that disaggregated data the expert mentioned so we know who needs help, or supporting a local NGO working on these issues. Or maybe it's just, understanding more deeply that these huge global issues always have local roots and often local solutions waiting to be discovered. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time, keep digging for those insights.